The jungle is hungry. Deep within the tropical lowlands of Mexico, the canopy grows so thick that sunlight rarely touches the soil. It is an environment that actively swallows and hides human history. And yet, if you push far enough through that darkness, you might stumble into an ancient gaze. 9-foot-tall basalt heads, resting in total silence right there on the forest floor. These belong to the Olmecs. Long before the Maya laid the first stones for their famous temples, the Olmecs were operating as the foundational civilization of Mesoamerica. They tracked the movements of the stars to build complex agricultural calendars, and they shaped massive mounds of clay and earth into some of the continent's earliest pyramids. Their most striking legacy is found in the stone itself. The powerful, distinct facial features they carved into these monuments required extreme precision. Accomplishing this at such an immense scale required a massive, highly centralized workforce. Around 400 BCE, the hearth fires in their great capitals, San Lorenzo and La Venta, went cold. The archaeological record shows their departure was accompanied by a systematic attack on the city's monuments. The Olmecs dismantled their own world, leaving behind a historical vacuum. Most cultures leave ruins to be reclaimed by nature. The Olmecs left a forensic record of self-inflicted destruction. Consider the immense physical toll that was required to carve this specific stone altar. Workers dragged volcanic rock for miles without beasts of burden or the wheel, hauling solid blocks of basalt that weighed up to 40 tons. Moving mountains of stone demands intense organization. It points to a highly structured society operating under centralized management for over 1,000 years. Then, the environmental conditions they relied on began to buckle. This map illustrates the vital river networks surrounding San Lorenzo and La Venta. Over time, these waterways choked with silt, cutting off the arteries that sustained the region. Without water flowing, agricultural zones rapidly contracted. The fields that fed thousands dried up. With the food supply failing, a deep, gnawing desperation spread across the lowlands. The daily rhythm of survival broke down. The 1,000-year continuity of their society fractured as the land that had fueled their growth turned against them. The departure from these cities was marked by a systematic purging of the urban landscape. Archaeologists found their massive, sacred stone altars violently smashed into pieces across the central plazas. Even the great heads were heavily mutilated. You can clearly see the intentional scarring gouged deeply into the eyes, nose, and lips of this sculpture. Some researchers interpret this destruction as an uprising, a starving population turning their hammers against the ruling class who failed to bring the rains. Others argue this was a dark, religious ritual. If the earth was failing, the Olmecs may have felt compelled to kill their sacred stones to appease the gods and return the power to the ground. Either way, the mechanics of this destruction are staggering. Breaking basalt with other rocks requires immense, organized energy, the same kind of force it took to build them in the first place. These deep scars act as a permanent record. They show a society making the deliberate choice to dismantle its own identity at the edge of collapse. With their monuments broken and their connection to the divine severed, the civilization dissolved entirely. Without thousands of hands to clear the brush, the lowlands crept back in. Root systems covered the shattered plazas, wrapping 1,000 years of human effort back into the mud. We tend to look at concrete and steel today and assume our human monuments are designed to be permanent markers of success. But the Olmecs prove that permanence is fragile. When the environmental limits are reached, a society can actively participate in its own erasure. It makes you wonder what we might do if our own ecosystems began to shut down and the food stopped arriving at our grocery stores. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you had to select exactly one specific object or structure to represent us to whoever digs up the soil 3,000 years from now, what should it be? True legacy depends entirely on what survives the earth. And while the Olmecs were defeated by their drying rivers, halfway across the world, another society was figuring out how to master the very water they lost. Roughly 4,500 years ago, a sprawling civilization thrived along the banks of the Indus River. At the center of this world sat Mohenjo-daro. In the local language, the name translates to the Mound of the Dead. When exploring ruins of this scale, we typically find the hallmarks of ancient power: massive statues of conquerors, murals of bloody battles, and grand palaces for ruling elites. Mohenjo-daro contains none of these. There are no monuments to kings and no depictions of war, leaving it an outlier among the great ancient empires. The archaeological record shows a total absence of weaponry. There are no defensive walls designed for siege, and no battle scars carved into the brickwork. We also find no evidence of forced labor or slavery. This city lacks the grand, singular monuments that usually required a centralized dictatorial power to construct. This raises a difficult question. How did an ancient society maintain such a hyper-organized metropolis without relying on the threat of violence or a dictator to keep the population in line? The city's physical layout suggests different priorities. This elevated view shows a metropolis built on a perfectly straight, mathematical grid. The housing is remarkably uniform. Instead of massive palaces, we see standardized multi-story brick houses, pointing to an egalitarian approach to living. This street-level view highlights their infrastructure. Notice the open drainage channel running flush against the high brick walls. These were part of a sophisticated underground sewage system. The plumbing managed public health with an efficiency unseen again until the modern era. This was a society organized around trade, cleanliness, and public health, rather than the glory of conquest. While the bricks tell us how they lived, the search for their specific values leads to the records the citizens left for themselves. These records take the form of the Indus script, found on thousands of small stone seals like this one. The script is complex, consisting of over 300 unique, flowing signs. However, there is a profound gap in our understanding. To this day, the Indus script remains completely undeciphered. Because their written words remain silent, our understanding of their society must be reconstructed entirely from the physical objects they built and left behind. Around 1900 BCE, the archaeological record for this organized metropolis comes to a sudden halt. Central public spaces like the Great Bath were left empty. Residents abandoned valuable personal hoards, including gold bangles and intricately crafted jewelry, leaving them behind in the ruins. We find no evidence of a final battle or a massacre. There are no charred bones or mass graves to suggest an invading army ended the city's life. The evidence suggests the population underwent a slow, agonizing retreat from the city center. The primary cause was environmental. The Saraswati River, the lifeblood of their agricultural system, began to vanish as its path shifted and its waters dried. As the water receded, the surrounding desert sands shifted, eventually swallowing the fields that fed the city's thousands of residents. The citizens didn't die in a single event. They drifted away, becoming nomads in a world that could no longer sustain their urban life. Mohenjo-daro remains physical proof that ancient humanity was capable of building highly sophisticated, cooperative civilizations without the use of war, falling only when the environment itself withdrew its support. Deep within the dense forests of the Americas, massive stone structures pierce the canopy. At their peak, the Maya civilization dominated this entire landscape. They built sprawling metropolises of stone. Cities like Tikal and Copan required staggering coordination, humming with the daily energy of tens of thousands of people. This diagram illustrates their calendar system, tracking the exact orbit of Venus. By observing the skies, they calculated a 500-year planetary cycle with an error of only 2 hours, achieving mathematical precision without modern instruments. To organize a labor force on this scale, society relied on a strict social contract. The people believed their rulers were divine mediators between the earth and the cosmos. It was a transaction. The working class provided labor, and in exchange, god kings guaranteed the rains would fall. Their calendars tracked the passage of days, but also calculated the end of history. They lived with a ticking clock. When this society finally fractured, it was not destroyed by a foreign military invasion. It broke down because of a flaw within that exact system of belief. In the 9th century, the reliable weather patterns stopped. A severe, multi-year drought locked over the southern Maya lowlands. The king of Tikal would have looked out from his pyramid over a landscape of dying vegetation. The horizon was choked by smoke as desperate farmers burned land in a failing attempt to force crops to grow. This chart tracks rainfall data for the region, showing a catastrophic drop in the 900s. It was a chaotic environmental variable that the rigid mathematics of their calendars entirely failed to predict. The populace responded the only way they knew how. They escalated their religious rituals and offered more sacrifices to the gods, yet the skies stayed clear and the soil turned to dust. Starvation was the immediate threat, but the deeper crisis was structural. The god kings were failing to deliver the rain, leaving their half of the societal contract unfulfilled. These stone carvings represented a universe governed by strict laws. But when the god kings could no longer command the clouds, their celestial logic was exposed as a hollow claim. The peasantry withdrew their belief and walked away from the stone plazas forever. Within a few short decades, the labor force evaporated. The people abandoned the cities, and the physical maintenance of the massive stone empire stopped. The rulers were left atop their monuments, mediating for a cosmos that did not listen, in capitals entirely devoid of citizens. The civilization vanished once its central promise failed. While the population endured elsewhere, the political apparatus that built these temples could no longer justify its own existence. With the plazas empty, the jungle slowly climbed back up the temple stairs, burying the architectural achievements under heavy vines and thick tree roots. There is a common misconception that the Maya vanished along with their cities. Millions of Maya descendants live throughout Central America today, continuing their cultural lineage long after the pyramids were abandoned to the forest. The people themselves were highly adaptable, surviving by returning to decentralized agricultural communities. It was their rigid political structure that proved too fragile for a changing environment. Today, we rely on our own rigid systems of agricultural and economic control, even as we face rapidly shifting global climates. The Maya tracked the end of eras with mathematical precision. Are we ignoring the same environmental warning signs that they saw just before their era hit a wall? These stone ruins remain as silent monuments to the vulnerability of any civilization that ignores the warnings of a shifting climate and a broken social contract. If you travel to the most isolated scrap of land on Earth, thousands of miles from any continent, you will find them. Rapa Nui, a tiny volcanic rock alone in the vast expanse of the Pacific. Standing in rows along the coast are the Moai, hundreds of giant stone sentinels, some weighing 80 tons, staring inland with hollow eyes. The people of Rapa Nui achieved the impossible, moving mountain-sized rocks across a volcanic island with nothing but rope and human will. But the island was a closed system. Without trade or neighbors, the inhabitants were completely reliant on a finite bank of resources. There was no external support and no way to leave. When the first European ships arrived in 1722, the sailors expected to find a thriving kingdom capable of these massive engineering feats. Instead, they found a people living in caves. The population had crashed, and the survivors were reduced to a state of desperate poverty. The islanders were living in the shadows of the giants their ancestors had built, hiding underground as the monuments loomed above them. This creates the central question of the island's history. Did these master engineers destroy their own world from within, or were they the victims of a catastrophe brought from the outside? The first theory is ecocide. Statues required wood. Workers required birds and fish. This chart shows those resources depleting to zero. Yet society didn't stop. They doubled down, funneling remaining energy into building statues even faster as their life support collapsed. We see the end of that race in the quarry today. Dozens of statues lie abandoned mid-carving when workers realized there was no wood left. Under this theory, the felling of that last tree was a fatal mistake. Without timber for canoes or transport sleds, the people were trapped on a barren rock with no way to reach the deep-sea fish they needed to survive. The moai stand as a physical ledger of this trade-off. Each towering stone god represents thousands of calories and tons of wood spent on a religious obsession, even as the island's environment was failing. But recent evidence challenges this narrative. Archaeological finds show that the islanders adapted, developing new farming techniques to survive the loss of the forests. This shifts the blame from internal mismanagement to the year 1722. The arrival of foreign ships introduced diseases that devastated the isolated population. Shortly after, slave raids kidnapped a third of the inhabitants, shattering the social structure that had maintained the island for centuries. In this version of history, the civilization didn't commit suicide. They had successfully balanced their limited resources, only to be crushed by a force from a world they didn't know existed. Both theories lead to the same conclusion. In a closed system, there is no margin for error. Once the balance is tipped, the collapse is total. This is why Rapa Nui matters today. When we look at our planet isolated in the vacuum of space, we are looking at the same closed system on a larger scale. We are currently harvesting our own finite global resources to fuel modern industrial monuments, testing the limits of our environment in the same way the islanders once did. It raises the question of whether we are repeating the same cycle. Are we ignoring the limits of our planetary system for the sake of short-term growth? The stone giants of Rapa Nui continue to stare across their barren home. They remain as a permanent monument to the consequences of pushing a finite world past its breaking point. When you think of ancient superpowers, your mind probably goes directly to Rome, Persia, or Han Dynasty China. These are the giants taking up all the oxygen in our history books. But there was a fourth major power operating on the world stage. This is the Kingdom of Aksum, positioned right at the gateway of the Red Sea. They built a massive footprint, acting as the primary commercial bridge linking Africa, India, and the Mediterranean. We have hard evidence of their extreme wealth. Aksum was the first sub-Saharan state to mint its own gold coins, a clear indicator of a highly sophisticated economy. They also had the resources to engineer towering public works. They erected these massive, monolithic granite obelisks, carving them out of single blocks of stone to project their power over the landscape. So, if Aksum had the wealth, the infrastructure, and the reach to act as a true peer to Rome and China, why did they disappear? How does an empire of this scale physically shrink into obscurity? The collapse of Aksum didn't come from a dramatic, sudden invasion or an overnight natural disaster. It started slowly, brought on by the rise of Islamic empires in the 7th century. This new reality shifted the global flow of goods. Established maritime trade routes were severed and rerouted away from Aksumite ports. With the sea cut off, their lifeblood was gone. Maritime revenue plummeted to zero, losing the gold required to mint their coins. The physical decay followed the economic ruin. Without the capital to maintain their public works, the great stone obelisks fell into disrepair and collapsed. Stripped of their global supply chain, their sprawling coastal empire became entirely unsustainable. To survive, the remaining population had to make a drastic choice. They abandoned the coastline altogether. Watch the map here. Their territorial borders rapidly contract, pulling inward from the sea. They initiated a mass migration upward, retreating deep into the rugged, physically impenetrable highlands of Ethiopia. These sheer drops and deep valleys provided incredible natural defenses against hostile armies. But that geography also created extreme claustrophobia, sealing them off from the outside world. A society that had built its entire existence on outward-facing maritime trade had physically boxed itself into a locked mountain fortress. Once isolated in the mountains, the descendants of Aksum were stripped of their global economic identity. Instead of commerce, they built an inward-facing society defined by rugged isolation and intense religious devotion. As the decades turned into centuries, the empire faded from the historical record, and strange legends began to leak out of the mountains. The most tightly guarded of those legends is their claim that they currently possess the biblical Ark of the Covenant, hidden away in a single, highly restricted chapel. The transformation was total. The highly visible masters of a global old trade had evolved into the invisible guardians of an ancient myth. The fall of Aksum tells us that massive wealth and towering stone monuments offer no permanence. A thriving economy is always just one shifted trade route away from oblivion. It raises a stark question. If a sudden global collapse severed our muffered supply chains today, would our cities survive, or would we also flee to the mountains? Share your thoughts below. Deep in the heart of Cambodia sits Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument ever constructed. At its peak, this was the central power of the Khmer Empire. Nearly 1 million citizens lived in the surrounding metropolis during an era when London was little more than a small provincial town. Building a city this dense in the jungle presents a massive geographical paradox. The region is battered by violent, unpredictable monsoon rains that should have easily washed out a settlement of this size. To survive, the Khmer became sophisticated managers of water. They engineered a sprawling network of artificial reservoirs and canals to bend the environment to their will. The physical footprint of this infrastructure is so vast and geometrically precise that it is easily visible from space. Yet, this same engineering triumph eventually triggered the collapse of the city. We are going to conduct a system postmortem to find out exactly how this massive, high-stakes water management network ultimately destroyed its creators. For decades, the dense jungle canopy obscured the true scale of the Khmer's engineering. It took modern LiDAR, laser scanning technology, to finally map the terrain below the trees. This map visualizes the LiDAR data, revealing a dense, hyper-interconnected grid of waterways. Initially, it smoothly distributed monsoon rains across miles of agricultural terraces. But constant expansion made the infrastructure tightly coupled. Every canal relied on its neighbor, leaving zero margin for error. The Khmer achieved a state of technological lock-in. Their survival depended on an over-optimized machine that could no longer absorb a sudden environmental shock. That shock eventually arrived. A massive flood slammed into the region, pushing water volumes far past the capacity of the embankments. The immense pressure found the weakest point, ripping through a critical central link. The rushing water redirected, slamming into adjacent canals. These secondary channels buckled, overloading the entire network in a rapid, unstoppable chain reaction. Engineers call this a cascading failure. The precise, tightly woven infrastructure that kept the city alive dismantled itself through a series of sequential structural failures. Without a functional grid to manage the flow, the water simply stopped moving. The sprawling reservoirs and broken canals devolved into stagnant pools. Those standing pools created a breeding ground for waterborne disease. Severe illness swept through the population, rotting the empire from the inside out. By the time the neighboring Thai kingdom launched their invasion, they met almost no resistance. They walked into a severely decimated ghost city. Today, the masters of water are gone, and the jungle has completely swallowed their masonry, reclaiming the land. The Khmer Empire survived centuries of external threats, only to be taken down by the unchecked complexity of their own technology. Are we becoming too dependent on complex technology that we can no longer control if things go wrong? The Khmer were ultimately broken by an excess of water. In our next episode, we examine a North American civilization that carved their lives into sheer cliffs and collapsed from the lethal absence of water. If you wander deep into the canyons of the American Southwest, you eventually hit a wall of silence. The scale out here is immense, isolating, and entirely unforgiving. But look closely at the sheer rock faces, and you'll find entire cities suspended in the stone. These are the Great Houses, massive, multi-story apartment complexes tucked deep inside natural alcoves. The ancestral Puebloans who built them weren't passing nomads. They carved a deeply entrenched society right into the cliffside, thriving here across dozens of generations. They tracked the movement of the sun with incredible precision, and they translated their mathematics into art. Just look at the intricate geometric patterns they fired into their ceramics. Then, right at the end of the 13th century, the alcoves went quiet. The people who built these vertical cities completely vanished. This wasn't a slow migration over hundreds of years. The archaeological record reveals a massive, highly advanced population evaporating from an impenetrable home almost overnight. When modern researchers finally reached these ledges, they found a frozen timeline. Beautifully crafted tools sat next to cold hearths. Clothing was left neatly folded. But the most unsettling discovery was tucked up near the rock ceilings. These small stone granaries were found packed with perfectly preserved corn and grain. A stationary, agricultural society relies entirely on the harvest it painstakingly gathers. You simply do not walk away from a year's worth of food unless something forces you out. So why leave it all behind? Does an untouched jar of grain point to a terrified, hurried escape in the dead of night, or a highly coordinated spiritual abandonment of the canyons? This archaeological record presents the ruins as a site of total, sudden interruption, a place where the daily rhythm of a complex society was abruptly severed. To understand what interrupted them, we must look closely at the climate of the late 1200s. Tree ring data reveals exactly what happened. This chart shows regional annual rainfall. Around 1276, moisture drops off a cliff, triggering a 30-year megadrought. Without steady rain, the second line, agricultural output, follows the exact same trajectory, eventually zeroing out entirely. Down on the canyon floor, the lush, carefully irrigated cornfields withered. The soil dried out, cracked, and turned to dust that scoured the valley. Now imagine the psychological pressure of year after year of crop failure. A dense, highly organized population was suddenly trapped in a basin that couldn't feed them. The environment they had mastered for centuries abruptly flipped. The canyons stopped providing life and became a slow, suffocating trap. This brings us back to the incredible locations of the Great Houses. Today, we look at them and see magnificent, peaceful isolation. But looking at the dizzying heights and vertical rock faces required to reach the front door, another reality emerges. This is calculated, defensive engineering. As the drought deepened and resources evaporated, neighbor turned on neighbor. The archaeological record shows a sharp spike in traumatic injuries, pointing to violent raids over remaining food. That breakdown of trust forced the society to adapt. They took their brilliant architectural skills and weaponized them, designing entirely around paranoia and self-preservation. They built defensive stone walls and restricted entry to single-file ledges, using towers to guard against anyone climbing from the valley floor. These marvels functioned as desperate, sky-high bunkers, built in absolute terror of their own starving neighbors. The stone walls held up against human raiders perfectly, but they couldn't block out the invisible, creeping threat of the changing climate. There is a fatal flaw in relying on an impenetrable fortress for survival. It only works if you have something to eat inside of it. Eventually, the math caught up with them. The relentless threat of violence outside, combined with absolute starvation inside, pushed the society past its breaking point. The population realized they couldn't wait out a 30-year siege. To survive, they had to drop everything, leave the grain in the jars, and walk away from their canyon fortresses forever. The cliff dwellings didn't fail. They were never conquered. In the end, the earth simply stopped sustaining the people hiding inside them. Today, the roofless foundations just sit quietly, baking under the bright, arid desert sky. The abandoned grain jars and tools remain as the chaotic debris of a society that shattered under the sheer weight of survival. The ancestral Puebloans leave us with a warning. We build our societies thinking they are permanent, but human civilization is inherently fragile. This is a literal desert ghost story, a stark, permanent reminder that when the rain stops and the earth dries up, even the greatest fortresses will fall quiet. Imagine walking for a mile through a dark, claustrophobic slot canyon, only to turn a corner and find a sunlit palace carved directly into the sheer cliff face. The Nabataeans sculpted these rose-red sandstone structures straight into the mountain, leaving them virtually impervious to the elements. It raises a question about our own architecture. If modern skyscrapers were carved into bedrock like Petra, would they outlast our current cities of steel and glass? Despite its physical permanence, Petra suffered no catastrophic wars or fires, yet the city was completely forgotten by the Western world for nearly 1,000 years. This creates a unique historical anomaly, a highly protected, wealthy metropolis that simply vanished from the global record. Physical permanence is an illusion. A city's survival relies on invisible support systems, and when those systems fail, even a city made of stone becomes a tomb. The Nabataeans built their empire by controlling water in one of the driest places on Earth. In a desert that receives only a few inches of rain a year, they mapped the entire canyon system to capture and store every drop of seasonal runoff. These conduits were cut into the rock to guide flash floods into hidden underground cisterns. This network transformed a barren canyon into a lush garden oasis capable of sustaining a massive population. Mastering this water technology was the prerequisite for their power. It gave them something to sell to the rest of the world. The Nabataeans served as the ancient world's primary middlemen for luxury goods. The Roman Empire had a massive demand for Eastern commodities, but those goods had to cross a punishing stretch of desert to reach the Mediterranean. High-value items like spices and frankincense, a tree resin used in medicine and religious rituals, drove this trade. Because crossing the desert required access to Nabataean water, the tribe held total control over every passing caravan. As the trade routes show, the sprawling geography of the desert converged into a single bottleneck at Petra. By weaponizing their water and their location, the Nabataeans created an economic monopoly that funded their monumental stone facades. When the Romans took over, the city didn't fall to a siege, but to logistics. Instead of the desert, merchants began moving their goods via the open ocean, transitioning from slow land-based caravans to highly efficient maritime shipping. A single Roman merchant ship delivered vastly more cargo at a fraction of the cost of a desert caravan. These new sea lanes completely bypassed the desert bottleneck. Once trade moved to water, the Nabataeans lost their leverage and income. The result was a tragic irony. The engineering worked and the stone remained pristine, but the city was abandoned. A city carved in stone can last forever, but it cannot survive being disconnected. When the world's trade moved to the ocean, the Nabataeans became ghosts in their own eternal palaces. While the Nabataeans were carving stone in the desert, our next civilization was building a maritime empire on a Mediterranean island, until a volcano ripped their world apart. In the ancient Mediterranean, survival strictly dictated that you hide your cities behind massive, impenetrable stone walls. It was a brutal era, and a lack of defense meant swift destruction. Yet right in the middle of this hostile sea, the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete thrived completely exposed. Look at their central hub, the Palace of Knossos. The architecture features sprawling, open-air balconies and decorative columns. There are zero defensive ramparts in sight. Because they didn't need to fund military infrastructure, the Minoans poured their vast wealth into civic engineering and art. They enjoyed indoor plumbing and decorated their doorways with vibrant marine life. Even their physical culture ignored rigid martial combat. Instead, they trained for extreme acrobatics, performing dangerous public spectacles where athletes vaulted completely over charging bulls. A peaceful, wealth-hoarding society sitting wide open in the ancient world presents a total historical paradox. By all logic, they should have been wiped out immediately. How did the Minoans protect their paradise without a single wall of stone? They built a wooden wall. The Minoans possessed the most advanced, lethal naval fleet on Earth, giving them absolute maritime supremacy. The geography worked perfectly to their advantage. The Mediterranean Sea served as an impenetrable moat, and their navy actively patrolled the perimeter. This monopoly allowed them to securely control regional trade routes and hoard vast agricultural wealth, completely free from coastal raids. The physical remnants of that secure hoarding are still visible today in the ruins. These massive ceramic storage jars, or pithoi, were designed to hold enormous surpluses of oil and grain. But this utopian existence was incredibly fragile. Their survival was entirely dependent on a single point of failure, the continuous operation of that fleet. Unfortunately, their paradise had a neighbor. A massive volcano sat just over the horizon on the island of Thera. Around 1600 BCE, that silent mountain violently detonated. The eruption exploded with an estimated force equal to 40 atomic bombs. The sudden, violent displacement of the ocean floor created a towering tsunami, hundreds of feet high, accelerating across the open water directly toward Crete. In a single afternoon, the roaring water slammed into the coast. It scooped up the Minoan wooden wall and instantly crushed their entire naval fleet. Meanwhile, the explosion injected millions of tons of vaporized earth directly into the atmosphere, leaving behind the massive, blown-out caldera we see at Santorini today. That thick volcanic ash choked out the Mediterranean sun for years. A localized nuclear winter set in, crops failed rapidly, and starvation took hold. The sea had functioned as the Minoans' ultimate protector. Now, the volcano had weaponized that exact same water to strip them of their only defense. Following the blast, the surviving population sat weak and starving, completely exposed inside their beautiful, wall-less cities. Opportunistic invaders from the mainland quickly realized the formidable Minoan fleet was gone. They easily crossed the undefended sea and overran the island. These invaders burned down the sprawling, labyrinthine palaces. In the throne room at Knossos, the dark soot baked into the walls remains a testament to the fires that finished what the volcano started. A highly advanced, peaceful society of immense wealth was swallowed by fire and water practically overnight. That terrifying reality rippled across the ancient world. As the story was passed down by neighboring cultures, the tragedy on Crete evolved into the enduring global myth of Atlantis. The legend of Atlantis stands as a real, forensic warning from the ancient world. It reveals exactly how fast the forces of nature can locate and brutally exploit a civilization's fatal flaw. Our final mystery takes us to the vast, open plains of Eastern Europe. Across modern-day Ukraine and Romania, a civilization known as the Cucuteni-Trypillians built the largest settlements in the world at the time, housing thousands of people. Yet, if you look for their legacy, you won't find stone pyramids or grand colossus. Instead, their entire civilization is recorded as a subterranean anomaly, a ghost map of thousands of burnt clay foundations. When archaeologists unearth a burnt ancient metropolis, the standard conclusion is usually catastrophic. Fire at this scale typically signals a violent end, an invasion, a siege, or the slaughter of a population. But the evidence in these ash layers is bizarrely clean. Researchers found 0 weapons and no unburied bodies. The damage is also too uniform for a siege. The fire appears to have been applied with methodical, deliberate precision. The uniform nature of the ash layers points to a purposeful choice. These people acted as their own arsonists, systematically setting fire to the very homes they had spent decades building. This discovery upends the standard view of how a society grows. The Cucuteni-Trypillians achieved an unprecedented scale, not by preserving their monuments, but by periodically destroying them. These burnings followed a strict schedule. Every 60 to 80 years, roughly the lifespan of a single elder, the entire community initiated a restart. The process required total cooperation. Thousands carried their belongings out of their homes, gathered as a community, and intentionally ignited their entire metropolis. They didn't use the fire to clear land for migration. Instead, they rebuilt their city directly on the charred remains. Over 3,000 years, this cycle created stacked vertical layers of settlements, literally built on 3 millennia of compounding ash. For the Cucuteni-Trypillians, torching a city served as a prerequisite for survival, a mandatory stage of their unique architectural cycle. The sanitary reset theory offers one explanation for why a population endured such recurring labor. Before modern plumbing, dense cities quickly became breeding grounds for pests and decay. A massive controlled fire was an effective method for eradicating bacteria and purging rotting timber. A second hypothesis focuses on a spiritual reset, where fire was a religious requirement of rebirth. The structures of the previous generation had to die off, purifying the site so the next generation could inhabit a fresh world. Why do you think they burned their own homes? Was it to start fresh, or were they running from something unseen? Let me know below. Regardless of whether the motive was microbial or mystical, this strategy of intentional impermanence successfully sustained a thriving civilization for 3,000 years. The Cucuteni-Trypillian strategy stands apart from the famous cultures of antiquity. While others obsessively built stone monuments in an attempt to conquer time, the Phoenix people embraced the ashes. Then, around 2700 BCE, the cycle ended. The burning ceased, and the entire population vanished from the historical record. They left no grand temples or hoards of wealth, only the silent mystery of their baked clay foundations. We have traveled from the jungles of Mexico to the islands of the Pacific, searching for the ghosts of our past. These civilizations remind us that nothing is permanent. Not our stones, not our gold, and not our empires. But their secrets remain, waiting for us to listen. If you enjoyed this journey through time, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a good mystery. And most importantly, if you want to keep uncovering the hidden truths of our world, subscribe to Timeless Secrets. Don't let history be forgotten. Stay curious, stay questioning, and we will see you in the next mystery. The Phoenix people suggest that the measure of a civilization's wisdom is found not in what it manages to keep, but in what it is willing to let go.